this book is just a really good story about a person who goes through their life, who had the cards dealt the way that they were, and experienced ups and downs. And then for me, one of the most enjoyable parts of the book is how that there's like a happy ending, I guess, for lack of a better word. I really, and the story itself it's not a story without challenges. There's so many challenges, just beginning from like where he starts his life as far as his like position in society, like his social position, and how that affects his whole childhood, and then how his childhood leads to, you know, the next step, the stages, and you watch this, the downward spiral, both that's the result of his choices as well as things that weren't his choice. And so for him to be able to, you know, stop that spiral, I guess, for lack of a better word, and rise from the ashes to become where, like, or to finally become himself, really, to embrace who he is, where he came from. And I like that too, actually, in this book, that the healing came from him embracing getting to know himself. I think a lot of the hurt came from him wanting to run away from who he was, and not even knowing who he was too. Like he chose to run away probably because of, again, like systemic racism, to just like nutshell the term that would encompass all of the reasons why he didn't want to be who he was. But also he didn't get to know who he was because he didn't get to know his mother, and he didn't get to know his father. And then he spent time with his grandparents, who were also spinning from their experiences and not really knowing who they were as they came through like their experience of history. So I just like it because it's an Indigenous perspective of an Indigenous life. And then add to that the bonus that this particular story has the great ending where he is able to overcome addiction, embrace who he is, and then not only, you know, do that, but go on to gain like many accolades in education and become a professor and write a novel. And I think, is he going for his PhD now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, my point is that I tend to silver line or bright side or be optimistic. And so it's hard for me to, when someone is like struggling and struggling really badly, not give them like the "you can do it and anyone can do anything" kind of speech or whatever. And so that's for me to practice when and where, or if to ever give those messages to whoever I might be talking to. But I like that that message is in this book because I really do believe those things. That's why it's hard for me not to do that to people when I'm trying to help them, for lack of a better word.
You believe, sorry, Kim, you believe that you can do it? Like, that's what you're saying?
I believe that anyone can do anything, right? And I know that I don't want to, like, at the risk of sounding like meritocracy, I don't mean like everyone's got an equal starting line, right? And just pulling up your bootstraps and getting to it equals success. But I do believe that anyone can overcome anything. And I guess that's the bottom line, in spite of challenges, in spite of setbacks, in spite of, you know, being born into a racist society from people who have already experienced 3 generations of trauma and, you know, like whatever, right? Like I believe that people, anyone can overcome, I guess. And I like that this book is like proof of that. You know, like I know lots of people don't, and lots of people go down in a blaze of glory, or lots of people don't recover from addiction, and lots of people, you know, I know there's a lot of sad endings too, but one of the reasons that I really like this book is that this is not that.
Yeah, like while I was reading it or being enraged or being like, no, not again, when he would like be with family and then something would happen and then he would go off again and you're like, one of the things about the book like that helped me, like almost motivated me to get to the end, was because anytime there's a hard part, instead of being like, oh, I don't know if I can read this book, I would be like, I know it gets better. Like I just needed to, like I held on to that.
I think I would have been able to read it even if it didn't have a great outcome. Of course, that would have been like really emotionally hard to get through that read, because you can't help but have your empathy become activated while reading this book. But it really is a great example of how from responsibility comes great freedom.
It's also the support too, right? I mean, he had his wife at the end, you know, he had people to be there for him to help support him and get through it.
Absolutely, Lindsay. I think that was like the big takeaway that I hope all human beings on this planet realize, is that it's not about going at things alone, that there is the component of you putting in the responsibility, the effort, but that you really come into yourself through connection and community and support. Without that integral ingredient, it is almost near impossible to tap into what Kim really orients herself around and gets attracted to, which is that concept of possibility and potential.
I don't want to make it sound like, don't worry, like if you just make a decision that you can be better, you can be better. He obviously needed to attend treatment. All of the support he received from those professionals, that had to be something that he was able to get to. So like 100% definitely have to like need help and be able to accept help. And that's where it goes to Kara's point about responsibility. He finally was willing to accept help. He finally, you know, admitted that he wanted better. That's another thing too. You have to be able to find within yourself that you want something different.
Even his family, like constantly emotional through the story, were like helping him and still showed they loved him despite the fact that he was so lost. Like, I think knowing that there's people there, right? That there's people there that love you, even though you're drifting all over the place, like they're still there for you.
And he talks about his trauma, but not by it's like he's not giving life to the trauma. He's telling his story. He's not, you know, it's not about the trauma, it's about him. But also beyond the trauma part and all the terrible things that happen, it's almost this is how I interpreted some of the stories he's saying. Is almost like he's telling the people who are trying to reach him, I heard you finally. And he's telling the story about all the people who cared about him throughout his life enough to try to help him. And the little things they did, whether what they did was exactly what he needed. You know, I mean, I think all people struggle with that with family members or children or whatever, like trying to love them in a way that they need to be loved. I mean, that's hard, but it was almost like some of the stories I felt were like a thank you to the people who he experienced, who were in his life, trying to reach him, you know, reaching out to him. And then at the end was where he finally decided to join in and like grab hold of all these people who were trying to bring him. So like in a way, it was kind of a bit of a love story. All the people that were there and helping him along the way. And then that final step when he was finally, I guess, found worth enough to then be part of that and help himself.
Yeah,
right?
that was the other thing that I liked about the story, is that he's not like, for us reading this story, we're like, oh my God, like poor him, oh no, right? And it's just like, obviously you can't help but feel feelings when you read about a 3-year-old who was left in an apartment with 2 other brothers that are, you know, 4 and 5, and they're starving, you know what I mean? Like, that's obviously really terrible. And then you get a bunch of sympathy, right? You feel really sorry for them. And it's just like, I don't know how to characterize it, but my point is that he tells the story as the person who had those experiences. And it's not, it's never not in this way, like, feel sorry for me or, oh my God, it was so bad. Like they never knew any different. He's just going through his story. You know what I mean? And so it really offers a super valuable and unique perspective.
You could tell that the author had done a certain amount of healing in the way that he shared his storytelling. And I love that, what you noticed, Meredith, about it being a love story, because it really was, like, whether it was the love that he needed at the time, the author does start to get to phases where he's starting to look beneath the surface and look at understanding
I listened to an interview with Jesse Thistle, and actually a lot of the stories that he wrote were part of his AA. So it was one of his steps for his recovery. So he wrote them not thinking he was going to publish them, but just stories, which makes sense for everything that you're all saying about his healing and accepting what he did and moving forward. And then actually the publisher approached him because they heard his story and said, hey, would you like to write a book? So he didn't write the book first and then got it published. He wrote that stuff as personal things to himself. And then the publisher approached him and then said, yeah, actually I do have some stuff to say. So that probably fits in with everything.
That's probably why we feel like that you get that sense when you read it.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like it's lacking that self-judgment, and it helps me not to judge, which I would naturally do, and I would judge it as a sad story. You know what I mean? I feel so bad for him, but I don't. As I read the story, like if I separate myself from the story, then I would feel bad. But as I hear the way he went through it all, it's just a human's experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like I said before, like he's like just like painting a picture of his life and then sewing the stories together. It makes so much sense that that's how it was, because if he was doing it for like a healing exercise, it makes sense being like, now I'll talk about this time, and now that I'm, you know, I'm trying to work through, and I'm going to talk about this thing that I'm trying to work through, and just the details of it rather than, you know what I mean? Like that makes so much
and
more
I love
sense.
how when I wonder how the poems fit in.
Oh, I love the poems.
With all that. And did you guys notice that it wasn't until, so the book is divided into like what I'd say like 3 sections. And did you notice that he didn't start to capitalize the letter I until the 3rd section?
That's so cool.
That's
so I want to get my book now.
But the poems, I wonder what part of his healing journey those came from, or if they were from his actual lived timeline, like when he was on the streets, because I found it so fascinating. And then the way that and then in his very last poem, he does a combination of lowercase I and uppercase I, and I was like, oh, it's kind of like, I really saw that as a form of like reconciliation. And to me, his poems very much represented the beats of his Métis roots and his indigenous circle calling him back. Like they almost added a pacing and a rhythm to the read that it was very hard to get through. Yeah, it was so brilliant. I just want to read it again.
Book interrupted.
This interruption is brought to you by silence. It's beautiful. It's golden. It's precious. It's rare. I don't even know what to do with myself. This is day 2 of the girls being back at school, and it's lovely. It's quite delightful. I can get a lot of stuff done when they're at school. Oh my gosh, I just had to share because the silence that I have been longing for is completely interrupting my life. So a little bit of an adjustment period on this end. I'm sure I'll adapt. I'll have fun adapting, but I just had to share this interruption of non-interruptions.
Book interrupted.
Really amazing too, learning the background that Lindsay offered with that this was just his personal like step work. How I don't know what a good enough word is, but how meaningful the book ended up being when he wasn't writing with the intention of convincing people or making them understand, or I mean, I guess maybe he was writing with the intention of making himself understand. It's really interesting to me that without the intention to create such a great book, out of authenticity, just being authentic with himself, right? Just the simple act of owning his truth, I guess, has like reverberated into like, I feel like that's where the magic is. Owning his truth just was good enough.
Yeah.
And like good enough and then some, right? Because now it's a really like great, like a good selling book if we want to talk about it from a financially, like if we're going to assess it on if it's good or not by how much money it made, right? It was good that way too. But like just owning his truth was so good that he didn't have to, attempt to manipulate the situation in any way to try to get that outcome.
Yeah, he wasn't writing it for other. He wasn't trying to write something that someone might like. He wasn't doing it for the people. He was doing it for himself. And then when he put it out there, then it helped people, right? Like because it was so true and honest. There was no other motivation other than, truth.
I think some of the best memoirs are memoirs like that are written for the person to share. There's not because they want to sell a lot, not because they want to, to convince somebody
some kind of emotion or
just think that someone else is going to read it. Like, that's why I can't write a diary. The whole entire time I'm thinking about what people are going to think when they read it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to try again. Sorry to interrupt you, Lindsay, but that's what it makes me think about.
I think I interrupted first.
All I want to do is write a diary or a journal, but every time I do, I know I'm inauthentic because all I can think about is who's reading
like
it.
You self-edit.
You should get one with one of those little keys. Remember they had that with the keys? Get one, put a lock around it, put it in a box.
I have a ton of writings that I often, especially when I'm angsty, I write and sometimes it's horrible. And sometimes it's just like, I don't know. It's like, it's not stuff I want to share, but I have it everywhere. And I always tell Laird, if you find something, I die, and you find something and I say something like whatever, I was like, don't take it personally and, just throw them out.
Throw them out. Don't read them.
Throw it out. Don't read it.
But I'm going to publish it. I'm going to self-publish your journals.
Okay. As long as you can make a lot of money and then donate it to charity, then I'll be happy.
Okay. Well, heard it here first.
Hey, Leah, we haven't heard much from you, bud.
Yeah, what do you think about the book?
There's nothing I could offer that you guys didn't say it better. It's my favorite book we read this year. It's my favorite book I've read in a long time. And I think that everything you guys have found out about him, of course, that's why it doesn't read like a victim, of course, because he wrote it kind of
his own hero.
Maybe more healed place. And of course, even if I didn't know his ethnic background, that storytelling from his culture is how it's like everything's lessons through story. And it felt so, in a different way, how different that felt from, let's say,
Glennon
Doyle, where it felt very guru. Mm-hmm. And she had great stories. She had some great stories.
And great lessons.
And great lessons. But for me, it was like, you didn't need to tell me the lesson. It just came through in his reading. It almost came through like a self-help book, without being a self-help book.
Without giving any advice.
Without no advice, just authentic. I just loved everything about the book. There wasn't anything I didn't like. I love things that I love swimming in super high highs and really low lows. So for me, anything that keeps me kind of in it, as much as it's like how awful and angry it made me, was probably what I liked about it. Like most people, I love a happy ending. But it just had it all. There's nothing I didn't like. I liked it all. I have no witty comments to add. It was just all good. It gets 10s across the board.
If you've enjoyed these video highlights, listen to the full episode on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Remember to like and subscribe and ring that bell to be notified when new episodes are published. Find out more by going to www.bookinterrupted.com.
Book Interrupted.